Hey, how you doing tonight? So I'm going to be reading from my novel, The Phoenix and the Falcon again. I'm on chapter 21, pretty far into the book. Sort of farther than I thought I'd go. Anyhow, tell a friend, looking for people to check it out on Amazon. Cool cover. So, again, we always leave Helena in crisis and lots of stuff going on with her. Obviously, she had a really tough time in terms of, can you imagine her whole world's been uprooted twice? Yet there is Valamir, who's quite interesting. So, Valamir has acquired a new servant. He's freeing him from the pernicious practice of slavery that was happening in the Roman world, and it's what when you got conquered, you lose big time, just terrible. So Rhys was from Gaul, which becomes France. So I saw him as a red-haired French guy, basically. Well, will become French. Kratapan waited outside his tent. As he watched Rhys hobbling behind Hassan, he did not bother to hide his hostility. Valamir leapt down to greet him. The old servant scowled in silence. The Goth turned from the implacable stare and became suddenly engrossed with helping Helena dismount. No longer able to postpone the inevitable, he faced Kratapan. Veins stood out on either side of the old Persian's neck. "Who's that?" he shouted, finally speaking, pointing at the red-haired man. Rhys. He was one of Attila's slaves. Kratapan folded his arms across his chest. His upper lip twitched. "I don't need help." Abruptly, he stalked inside his quarters. Valamir stayed after him. "See to my horse. His halter is hanging by my tent," he said to Rhys, handing him Hassan's reins. He gestured toward the other horses. "Leave him with the white stallion and the mare, and then come back and wait." As Rhys untacked the roan, Valamir observed with a critical eye. Though pleased that one of Attila's servants had returned Pasiel and Sorel, Helena stepped closer to examine them for any sign of injury. "You better come with me, Helena," Valamir said, interrupting her. "This may be more delicate than I had imagined." She nodded and gave Pasiel a quick pat on his neck. But her heart was light. Kratapan's act had not fooled her. He just hated to admit that he was no longer able to do everything. Uninvited, they followed Kratapan into his tent. He was grumbling to himself as he stirred food in a pot over a fire. Rhys, indeed. With a graceful hand motion, Valamir signaled Helena to sit beside him. She ignored his suggestion and knelt behind Kratapan, rubbing his back and shoulders with her one good hand. "Rhys has a way with horses, but needs direction. Should you accept him, he'll be fortunate. If Valamir sends him back, Attila will surely kill him. Apparently he's not easily cowed, even after repeated beatings," she murmured. "You're very clever," Kratapan said, softening against her touch. "Give me his particulars, so I have to accept him out of guilt." Helena winked at Valamir. "No more than you're a stubborn old man." Kratapan sighed with contentment as her fingers rubbed the back of his skull. "I capitulate, Helena. I'll see what I can do with this man, Rhys. But I make no promises. If he won't listen to me, I don't care what Attila does to him." When she pressed her thumb where his neck met his skull, he exhaled deeply. She stood absent-mindedly, touching her fingertips together, careful not to exert too much pressure on her injured hand. "Tell me about this Rhys," Kratapan said. "I imagine that Attila sent him here with nothing but the clothes on his back." "Clothes? Rags be more apt," Valamir said, laughing. Then he shared with his oldest confidant what he knew about the Gaul, including his offer of freedom. "You're too easy," Kratapan said. "No, he's been a soldier. He deserves respect. At least I won't have to worry about him having my throat slit while I sleep." "Exactly. Come outside and I'll introduce you properly." Kratapan followed Helena and Valamir, complaining under his breath about having to break in servants only knew how to kill. But when he saw Hassan already at grass, content with the other horses, he relented. "Oh, very well, he'll do." "Good," Valamir said. Rhys squatted by Valamir's tent, waiting and staring at the stars. Quickly responding to Valamir's quick wave, he bowed as the Goth introduced Rhys to Kratapan. The tour complete, Valimir turned away from them, hiding his smile. "Good night. Sleep well." Once inside their tent, Helena and Valimir laughed like mischievous children, afraid of being overheard by their elders. "You should have seen Kretchman's face when he realized you were leaving him alone with Rhys," Helena said. "He'll be fine. He just hates change. He'll complain for a while. Later he'll insist that Rhys was his idea." Valimir pulled her to him, his eyes bright. A smile hovered on his lips. He stroked her hair. I knew you the moment I set eyes on you. I don't understand what's happened, but it doesn't matter. I'm as glad that you're here with me." "I wish I'd trusted you. Then I have everything," she said, thinking of Mikhail. "My mind doubted what my heart already knew." "Don't look back. You don't have the past. You only mark the present." She lingered in his arms, absorbing the tangy smell of his leather clothing, and enjoyed the sensations coursing through her body. Both shocked and stimulated by her desire, she showed none of it. The sexual act still frightened her in a way that transcended words. His eyes devoured her. "We must sleep. Tomorrow will be hard." As they lay together, he did not touch her. She wanted to be closer, but was paralyzed by chaotic fears, yet she could not imagine being anywhere else. As morning dawned, darkness was fading and it was cold. For once, Helena was awake before Valimir. As she looked outside, the camp was asleep. Hardly anyone was stirring. She moved about the tent quietly, not wanting to disturb him. Shivering, she put on her coat and sat by the fire, feeding its dying flames with 2 slender sticks. With hands inside her coat, she stared at the embers, spurting upward as the kindling ignited. Yet the image of Valimir's face during the assault persisted in her mind. He had been a stranger, indifferent and cold in pursuit of his need. She forced the memory forward to the next morning when he had mutilated his chest with a rune. His barbarism repelled her. With painful honesty, she considered how the darkness compelled her, and wondered who was more civilized. Mikhail's face floated in her mind. She turned from her grief by readying for the day's journey. Finished with her packing, she sat beside the small blaze. Valimir stirred, but did not awaken. Restless, Helena pulled out her dagger, examining Kretchman's expert restoration. Running her fingers over the smooth ivory handle, she wondered where Valimir had put her grandfather's sword. Her brow furrowed, she scanned the tent to no avail. Disappointed, she realized that he must have left it with Kretchman for repairs. Almost as if it were a talisman, she wanted to hold it, believing it would act as a ward against the darkness. Feeling certain Kretchman would be awake, she went outside. The dawn's light edged the horizon, promising the sun. Helena listened outside the servant's tent, but heard no rustling, only an intermittent snore. Enjoying the solitude, she walked the short distance to visit Pasiel. He greeted her with a deep whinny. As she combed his mane with her fingers, she talked to him about Valimir. Contact with horses, especially Pasiel, brought her peace. Startled, the stallion snorted, breaking her reverie. Helena's heart pumped with alarm. Turning aside, she saw Greillia, mounted and bearing down on her, less than 3 lengths away. Her hand on her knife, she shouted, "Valimir!" Quickly she ducked under Pasiel's neck, using him to shield her. She held her dagger low and out of sight. Greillia halted his horse with a bestial snarl. Her skin crawled. She screamed again for Valimir, but kept her eyes on Greillia, afraid to look away. Instantly her fear was gone. Words came unbidden from her throat in slow, distinct Gothic. She felt implacable and remorseless. "I see before me a dead man." The Hun laughed, but she could sense uneasiness emanating from his very pores. His distress fed her, increasing the darkness churning within her. "Your death was slow, and without honor," she said. Greillia, his face pale, yanked his horse's mouth hard, forcing the animal back 2 paces. "What are you saying, bitch?" With her knife she sliced her bandage, the split falling to the ground. "I cursed you twice already. Last night, the Dark One took your blood, but now he calls for mine." Greillia watched her, spellbound, as she slit her palm, opened it with a straight line. Her blood dripped on the earth, and she let the dagger follow. It landed with a small thud. She rubbed her hands together gently but thoroughly, so that both palms were red. As if for a distance she heard Valimir shouting, "Helena! No!" But she ignored the sound. It was irrelevant. A distraction. Her hands bloodied. She drew the rune. The power filled her, making her feel beyond judgment, even time. As her eyes fixed on his face, Greillia stared aghast. She spoke in Gothic. "The earth herself joins me in my curse. She thirsts for your blood, longs for your bones. You are the last of your line. No children will follow you to your creator. Now go, find your destiny." She heard Valimir's footsteps running towards her. She, not pausing, not releasing Greillia from her eyes, she repeated the words in ancient Persian. Finished, she heard Valimir breathing at her side. Stricken, Valimir spoke to Valimir. "She's a sorceress! You should have warned me!" Helena's answering smile was filled with malevolence. Greillia wheeled his horse away. As he urged it into a gallop, she stared at the blood on her hands. "Helena, what have you done?" Valimir demanded. She looked up into his blue eyes, bright with worry, and broke. "I don't know." She stared at her red hands and sobbed. Valimir put his arm around her shoulders, but she pulled away. With despair, she lowered her head and felt contaminated and unclean. He touched her chin, lifting her face to his. Shame swept her, but it was parried by the remnants of her exultation. Again she heard the inner voice. "No more, Helena. You've called in the Dark One. Each time he comes, he's holding you grow stronger," said her inner voice. "When I heard your cry, my heart was in my throat," Valimir said. "But you didn't need me. Never before have I seen Greillia so afraid. I felt something strange in the air, like a roaring stream pulsating with currents. I don't understand what happened, Helena. But the Kratapan can see to your hand." She felt drained, exhausted in mind and soul, resolving never to release the darkness again. She squared her shoulders. But from deep within she heard the laughter, heavy with malice, and knew in her bones that good intentions alone would never suffice. Valimir bent down to retrieve her dagger and splint. With a sigh, she drew the light rune, knowing that it would help, but wishing it could effect a total cure. She allowed the darkness to seep inside of her. He stood beside her quietly, waiting for her to speak. "Something's very wrong with me," she said. "What do you mean?" he asked in a gentle voice. "When I see Greillia," she said, her voice hesitant, "I feel a presence. It used to be outside of me, but now I feel it within. I see terrible things. I mean them with every fiber of my body. When it's over, I feel utterly empty. It makes me afraid." "Maybe Greillia just brings out the worst in you," Valimir said. "I know that he does in me." She shook her head, disappointed in him. Valimir took a deep breath, as if to try again. "I don't know about these things, but the shaman would. His world is different, more at one with the earth and all of its forces. We could ask for his help." Feeling renewed hope, Helena nodded. Her heart lighter, she heard the soft calling the birds as they greeted the day. "We could ask the shaman," she repeated, as if it were a prayer. As they returned, Valimir's arm was around her shoulders. Kratapan, outside with Reese, walked towards them. "What happened? Did Greillia hurt you? She doesn't look well." With bitter irony, she thought his question should have been reversed. She stared stolidly ahead. She re-injured her hand. "Talk to her while you tend to it," Valimir said. Despite his arthritis, Kratapan met them quickly. When he sighted her hand, his eyes widened. "What have you done to yourself?" She forced herself to look at him. "When I saw Greillia, I drew the rune." They needed no other explanation. Kratapan only nodded. His mouth was set in a grim line. "I'll need my kit before we pack up. Reese and I will take care of everything. You see to Helena," Valimir said. Kratapan protested. "You'll never get the tents and our gear into the wagon." Helena touched his arm. "Stay with me." Glancing at her face, he blinked his eyes quickly. "Come sit by the wagon. I can make sure they do it correctly. I'm not so old that I can't do two things at once." Dawn had come, sweeping the sky with glory. The huge camp was alive with activity. When Kratapan fussed over her hand, Valimir and Reese tended to the tents. Helena felt numb inside, trapped by emptiness, and she could not understand. Unlike the misery after Mikhail's death, this feeling was pernicious. It was as if the darkness stole her soul, bit by bit, leaving her shaken and defiled. Helena thought of her small victory over Attila when he had thought to compel her with his eyes. The light had been potent and effective against him, but she did not trust it to protect her against physical danger. Though deeply frightened, she vacillated about asking the shaman for help, unwilling to relinquish her only weapon against Greillia. As Gratipan cleaned the wound, she bit her lip, not from pain, but from an acknowledgement that she was not ready to renounce the power. She had savored the spectacle of Greillia's face transformed by fear. A taste of exultation lingered in her mouth. In soft Persian, she described these feelings to Gratipan. He listened without interruption, and more importantly, without judgment. Finally he spoke. The shaman will help you find a better way to be strong. She swallowed, not wanting more tears, and studied Gratipan's expert work on her hand. He had bandaged it neatly, an extra layer between her cut and the splint. Mortified by what she had done to herself, she looked at him. Gratipan's eyes twinkled. Valamir's injury was worse. Helena laughed. At the sound, Valimir looked up from his work, his face reflecting relief. He'd be better off with a woman of his own tribe, Helena said, not for the first time. Stop feeling sorry for yourself, Gratipan said. Nothing good ever came of self-pity. An impish grin touched the corners of her mouth. Keeping her voice neutral, she looked him in the eye. I guess it's a good thing I didn't wound my good hand, that I wouldn't be able to bring you to your senses with a decent back rub. Staring at each other, their laughter was sudden and mutual, not stopping until Valimir interrupted his work, demanding to know the joke. Yet they had no words for an explanation. Valimir shrugged his shoulders, but looked pleased at Helena's changed mood. Since both of you are feeling so much better, come and help. But the tents were already dismantled, and the wagon was all but loaded. I'm impressed, Valimir. Clearly you don't need my assistance. Besides, Lena are hungry for breakfast, Gratipan said. By Mithras, I'll never understand why I put up with you, Valimir said, shaking his head, not hiding the affection in his eyes. Gratipan watched him rejoin Rhys. In some ways, he's like Bevian, hating to be left out. And his defense was immediate. He's a good man, better than most. Gratipan chided her. I love him too, but that doesn't mean he has no feelings. None of us walk in perfection. Now let's eat quickly while we can. With a wave of his arm, Gratipan gestured to Valimir and Rhys. After hurrying through the remnants of yesterday's meal, the men made the final preparations for the journey. Do you want to ride on the mare or in the wagon? Valimir asked Helena. She thought for a moment. Sorel, I want to be with you. His smile radiated in her heart. Nothing else mattered but the way his eyes lit up as they met hers. Reaching for him, she touched his cheek, immediately cradled her in an embrace. Already the bulk of the tribe was mounted, ready for the day's journey. We must ride, he said with reluctance, gently disengaging himself. Rhys, saddle the mare. The Gaul efficiently readied Sorel. Helena gave her a leg up, and she was astride the restive mare. When Sorel laid back her ears in irritation as Han, the stallion responded with a soft neigh. Hoping her horse would not fuss all day, Helena wondered if the mare was in season and able to be bred. It was a small miracle that the two stallions had not fought each other over her. When Valimir attached a lead line to her bridle, Helena did not protest. She accepted that Sorel would be too much for her to handle with only one good hand. Leaving Gratipan and Rhys with the wagon and the other horses, Valimir and Helena rode toward headquarters. Attila sat astride his black stallion at the center of activity, impassively watching the smooth flow of operations. In a covered wagon, Helena could hear his women talking and laughing amongst themselves. His greeting was brusque. You've come. Good. Stay with me. As he indicated his head to Helena, his eyes narrowed. You've much to tell me. We've time enough to talk. Time for me to hear what you were reluctant to say last night. She avoided the issue. Where's Magga? She asked, not out of curiosity, but out of concern that she had survived the night. Over there, he said, gesturing behind the wagon. Greillia won't be pleased, she said. Magga raised her head and stared with malevolence at Helena. He will when he receives the payment for her services, he said, abruptly ending the discussion. Now, Helena, tell me what you said to him last night. Her throat tightened, But not from Attila's question. Greillia had come to fetch Magga. He yanked her to her feet by the hair. Following Helena's gaze, he grunted with disapproval as Greillia struck Magga to the ground. "He's a fool," Attila muttered to Valimir. "The woman's worth money, but not if he's finished with her." He called out, "Greillia, here!" The Hun looked up, his face wild, and kicked Magga one last time. Trying to protect her face, she covered it with her hands, moaning. He spat on her, then swung on his horse and galloped a few strides to his cousin. "You called me by name," he said, his face jubilant. Seeing Helena, he became rigid, as if bound by an invisible cord. He stared, unable to turn away. Helena felt the darkness hovering, craving expression, but she controlled it, refusing the compulsion. Not wanting to risk more of herself, she averted her eyes, releasing him. With his mouth open, his breathing was shallow and fast. As if to find safety in Attila's hard stare, Greillia concentrated on his cousin. She heard the laughter, baleful and seductive, luring her with its song. With discipline, she called on the one God to protect her from unclean presences, both spiritual and physical. She added with a quixotic flash of humor. As if by accident, Valimir backed up his horse just enough to obstruct most of her view of the two Huns. His eyebrow raised, he smiled at her, but his nostrils were pinched. "Yes, Greillia," Attila said, "I know you now. Here is your reward for the favor of your woman." He craned her neck, wanting to see. Greillia seemed rooted to the ground as he waited for another of Attila's gifts. The puncture on his face that he had sustained was now an oozing sore. Yet Greillia accepted his due from Attila with total acceptance. Attila held up a large gem, yellow and translucent. His mouth agape, Greillia stared at it with awe. As the sunlight glinted off the stone, Helena recognized one of the least valuable in her grandfather's collection, a gem destined for a relative lacking in discernment. She choked back the impulse to laugh with a hard cough. The stone in his hand, Greillia turned it over, studying it from all sides. "It's magnificent," he said, his voice a reverent whisper. He glanced at Magga, who remained by Attila's wagon. She had pulled herself from the ground, her face in her hands. "She told me that you'd send her back. You've given me riches. I don't understand, cousin." Attila cleared his throat. "I may require her company from time to time. She's all that you promised, perhaps even more. Keep her clean and in good condition. And Greillia, I'll not want her services if you ruin her by passing her around the tribe. I'll compensate you well to make up for the lost profit." Greillia bowed his head. "I don't deserve your generosity." "That is true," Attila said. Greillia frowned, and with resolve looked at him straight in the eye. "Cousin, Valimir's woman cursed me with the earth power. She said I was a dead man." He heard a tremor in his voice. Helena curbed the obscene elation bubbling within her. She stroked Cyril's neck and prayed. Greillia's voice became hoarse. "She used her own blood." Attila raised his eyebrows and whistled. "Did she? Interesting. Didn't you hear me? She told me I was dead." "And you believe her?" "Yes." "Then you are marked. You'd best ask the shaman. He'll tell you what to do." Greillia nodded like a wayward child. "I'll trust your wisdom, exalted one." In an instant he was on his horse, galloping towards Magga. Without breaking his horse's stride, he twisted sideways in the saddle. He grabbed her by the arm and tossed her behind him. Attila kept his eyes on Greillia, not bothering to veil his disgust. He motioned for Helena and Valimir to come up closer. "Last night you cursed him, but you don't want to talk about it." Belying his mild voice, Helena sensed his boiling rage. She had the impulse to plead for his mercy and confess everything. Yet she kept silent by holding steady and expanding the light in her heart. Drawing strength from her essence, she told Attila what had happened. Her voice was quiet, her thoughts were clear. Attila listened intently, oblivious to the commotion of the camp's dismantling. When she had finished, his questions flew at her like a volley of arrows. "Why only Greillia? Why not me? Why not all of us?" "He stole my son's life." She paused. "Valimir thinks that I too should ask the shaman for help." "Perhaps, Lena, but wait and see what happens with Greillia." "Why?" He laughed, a short, brief sound, like a stick cracking in a blazing fire. To see how the curse works. She shook her head with disbelief. But he's your cousin. Because of you, Valimir won't touch him unless he attacks first. And Greillia knows that. He has not challenged Valimir to an honest fight, preferring to hide behind his kinship tie with me. But our law is silent about words. Helena's eyes narrowed. You learned many things from the Romans, I think, including the talent to prevaricate like an orator. He smiled broadly, showing his large white teeth. A Hun survives, learning much from his enemies. His laugh rang out, a peal of triumph. Valimir's voice was a bucket of cold water. I'm going to take her to the shaman, Attila. Each struggle with the power weakens her. Attila frowned, shrugging his shoulders. Just be certain that Greillia is not there, looking at the problem from the other side. Valimir chuckled. Pleased with his witticism, Attila squared his shoulders and surveyed the camp's activities with fierce concentration. Helena felt disheartened. They did not understand. If the darkness won, the price would be her soul. She looked to the west, yearning for her old home in Constantinople, where life had been defined by her grandfather's kindly presence. She sighed. The past was gone and closed forever. When Attila threw back his head, he howled. Startled, Helena flinched. To me, he shouted, his face transfixed with jubilance as horsemen converged upon them. With dust and uproar, the day's journey began. And that's chapter 21. So, I should see you next week. I hope you have a good week, and keep safe and enjoy the day. The night is night now. Take care. Bye.